the Muslim Brotherhood, the moderate organization that this administration chose to ally itself with. I was told to remove all unauthorized references to terrorism. I can't explain to you the ideology or the worldview of this administration that makes them so adamant to protect Islam.
A Department of Homeland Security whistleblower is found dead.
Haney was found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in Amador County over the weekend.
Philip Bruce Haney was born on July 9, 1953, to John and Dorothy Haney in Ventura County, California. After graduating from UC Davis and UC Riverside, Haney would go on to a successful career working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
I was a field agricultural entomologist, and I worked in third world countries with farmers to reduce pesticide use. And one of my specialties was ants.
During this time, he traveled extensively to the Middle East, and it was there that he taught himself Arabic and extensively studied the Quran. Responding to the events of September 11, 2001, Haney became one of the founding members of the Department of Homeland Security, where he quickly rose through the ranks. Haney cites his experience as an entomologist as the reason he became an effective counterterrorism officer.
I was an entomologist. I was a real original nerd. And what do nerds do? They collect everything, right? And they write everything down. That's a potent combination when you take a nerd and you turn him into a counterterrorism specialist, especially if he's an entomologist, because what do entomologists do? Especially me, I follow the trail and I find the nest. That is counterterrorism. Follow the trail, find the nest.
In 2006, Haney wrote an open source analysis article in Front Page magazine entitled Green Tide Rising, Hamas Ascends.
And my own agency with the CIA accused me of using or unethical use of classified information to write the article without ever asking me how I came to the conclusions.
After 11 months of investigation, Haney was exonerated of these charges. This incident was Haney's first indication that something was going wrong at the DHS. Under the new administration of Barack Obama, beginning in 2009, Haney said things began to get progressively worse within the agency.
His job was to investigate individuals with potential links to terrorism, and it was in that capacity that Haney says he noticed a trend of people with suspected radicalized ties coming into the United States.
Then 6 years into your tenure in 2009, you were ordered to scrub the records of Muslims with these terror ties by our government. Who told you to do that?
I was directed from DHS headquarters in what I call the first great purge, when I was ordered by the Department of Homeland Security headquarters to modify a euphemism, removing all linking information out of approximately 820 text subject records in our law enforcement system that almost exclusively had to do with Muslim Brotherhood network here in the United States. They told me, we want you to eliminate. The word was modify. All the linking information in about 850 records that I put into the system on guess what group? The Muslim Brotherhood. I would like to show you now the logo of the Muslim Brotherhood, the moderate organization that this administration chose to ally itself with. Across the middle it says Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, which means the brothers of the Muslim, or the Muslim Brotherhood. And at the bottom, taken from Quran 860, is the word Wa'ayuda, which means prepare yourselves to terrify your adversaries with steeds of war or weapons of war. That is the motto of the Muslim Brotherhood. By the spring of 2010, we had come to the point that a CBP officer was literally linking information, meaning the dots, on Muslim Brotherhood-linked individuals from text, while the administration was bringing the very same individuals into positions of influence to help create and implement our counterterrorism policy, both in the domestic arena and in the foreign policy arena, as evidenced in our overt support of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Libya, Algeria, and Syria.
Despite his frustrations with higher-ups at the DHS, Haney continued working diligently to prevent future terror attacks. He had been successfully tracking terrorists that were connected to a group called Tablighi Jamaat when he once again crossed paths with the administration.
And this is an icon of the Tablighi Jamaat movement, one of the largest in the world. Outside of the United States, it's called the Army of Darkness. I began a TDY assignment, meaning temporary duty, at the National Targeting Center in November of 2011. Within 6 months, we had instituted 1,200 law enforcement actions on the case that we had started. During the course of this work, I was given a commendation letter for finding 300 terrorists related to this case, just that case.
But a year into that investigation, Haney says they got a visit from the State Department and the Homeland Security Civil Rights Division, who said that tracking these groups and individuals was, quote, problematic because they were Islamic groups.
In March of 2012, the State Department, in cooperation with Janet Napolitano, Department of Homeland Security, shut the case down, despite all the evidence and the good work that we were doing. Subsequently, I went back home to my home port and I created a component of the Tablighi Jamaat case called the Institute of Islamic Education. While I finished the case up, I put it in the system. There were 67 records related to the case, individuals and organizations. Within about 2 weeks after I put the case into the system, I went on vacation and I was called from my colleague and said that they had removed the records entirely from the system. They didn't just modify them, they completely obliterated them, took them out. Those are the records related to the network of mosques and organizations operating in the United States that is linked to the San Bernardino shooting and to the Orlando shooting.
Haney believes if his work had been allowed to continue, it may have thwarted last week's attack.
Therefore, two things very plausibly would have happened. Either Syed would have been put on the no-fly list because of association with that masjid, and/or the K-1 visa that his wife was given may have been denied because of his affiliation with a known organization.
You did your job, and other people did their jobs, and in comes the Obama administration, and they wipe out all the work that could have potentially saved the lives of Americans. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it's a fair statement. Not only did they remove the records, but they also investigated me. They said essentially that I did not have the authority to put those records into the system, even though I had been commended by the National Targeting Center for finding 300 terrorists. So essentially the last 3 years of my career, I was under investigation by 3 different government agencies, all at the same time. They determined that I was essentially more of a threat than these terrorist groups. At the end of my career, I was relieved of my service weapon. All access to text was cut off and suspended. My secret clearance was revoked, and I was sequestered for 11 months while the results of 3 simultaneous investigations from 3 different branches of the government were concluded. In July of 31 of last year, I retired honorably.
After his retirement in 2015, Haney knew he needed to share his story with the American public. When he saw the news of the San Bernardino shooting and its connection to the Tablighi Jamaat case, this only increased his resolve.
And in the morning that the news broke, and they showed the picture of the man, Syed Farouk, and his wife, Tashfeen Malik, and then showed the mosque that he went to, Darul al-Islamiyah, I felt like I got struck by a bolt of lightning. And I sat up and yelled at the screen, "That's my case!" Because it was the Tablighi Jamaat. I knew it like that. And that set off a whole sequence of events that is still going on to this very day. It's really what led me to you today.
In February of 2016, Haney wrote an op-ed for The Hill entitled, "DHS ordered me to scrub records of Muslims with terror ties." Conservative media outlets reported on his story, while the mainstream media mostly ignored him. Haney was labeled anti-Muslim by left-wing groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, but no one has ever disputed the accuracy of any of his claims. In May of 2016, Haney published a book about his experiences entitled "See Something, Say Nothing." A Homeland Security officer exposes the government's submission to jihad. The book is a detailed exposé of what he learned during his career. Soon after that, he testified in front of a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee. The Department of Homeland Security was invited to the same hearing to provide a rebuttal to Haney's claims, but they declined. Instead, the chief of the DHS appeared in front of the same committee 2 days later. only to plead ignorance to Haney's entire story.
Was Mr. Haney's testimony that the Department of Homeland Security ordered over 800 documents in CBB altered or deleted, was that testimony accurate?
I have no idea. I don't know who Mr. Haney is. I wouldn't know him if he walked in the room.
So you have not investigated whether your department ordered documents to be modified in 2009 to remove references to jihad, radical Islamic terrorism, the Muslim Brotherhood. You have not investigated that question?
No, I have not taken the time to investigate what Mr. Haney says, no.
After his testimony and media tour, Haney traveled around the country speaking about his experiences. He also maintained friendships with several conservative commentators, reporters, and elected officials. He told many of these friends that he would never commit suicide.
And he had said to friends as recently as 2 weeks before his death, if there's an announcement that if I'm dead and there's a suicide letter, it will be a fake. And he often said, I would never commit suicide.
Under the new administration of Donald Trump, Haney began to slowly regain confidence that the U.S. government was actively confronting the threat of radical Islamic terrorism.
And unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth.
Haney's friends reported that he was considering ending his retirement and resuming his work at the Department of Homeland Security.
It appeared he would be coming back to work for the United States government and finally be able to put to full use his incredible knack for rooting out terrorists.
When his wife Francesca tragically died of cancer in 2019, Haney moved from his home in Georgia to California to be closer to his sister Diana. It was there that he later fell in love with a conservative radio host from Bakersfield, Denise Gary Pandle. The two were engaged to be married, and the wedding date was set for April 4th, 2020. In November 2019, Philip Haney sent several text messages to reporters at the Washington Examiner. He told them he was writing a sequel to his book, See Something, Say Nothing, that would be called National Security Meltdown. He said this new book would cover the events that took place since his public testimony, and he intended to release the book in mid-spring of 2020. In early February of 2020, Haney began to experience anxiety, insomnia, and a racing heart. On February 16th, he called his sister Diana and told her he needed her, so she drove 35 minutes to pick him up at the RV park where he lived. Haney stayed with his sister for a few days until his anxiety subsided. She dropped him back off at his RV on February 19th. On February 20th, around 12:40 p.m., Haney saw a cardiologist who diagnosed him with a leaky mitral valve. She said he would need open heart surgery before it became more serious, and that there would be a 3-month recovery period. She emphasized that the condition was not life-threatening, but it could be over time if he did not get the surgery soon. At around 2 p.m., Haney spoke over the phone to his fiancée, Denise Gary Pandle, about the diagnosis. Haney was upset that the 3-month recovery time was going to postpone their wedding date, but she told him not to worry and that it wasn't a big deal. Around 3 p.m., Haney spoke to his neighbor D. Roy Stiles Jr. They discussed Haney's surgery and his plan to sell his RV and move in with his sister during his recovery. Haney offered to give Stiles his potted plants and his portable fire pit. The two also discussed Haney's plan to move to Bakersfield with his fiancée once they were married. Between 5 and 5:45 p.m., Haney has short phone calls with his sister Diana and his brother Terry about his diagnosis. Terry tells him that he also has the same heart condition and that the surgery is common and no big deal. Around 6 p.m., Haney texted 3 of his friends about his diagnosis and surgery plans. One of those friends was the acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli. Philip Haney's reply to his friend Robert Bray at 6:08 p.m. was the last communication he ever sent.
A Department of Homeland Security whistleblower is found dead. The Amador County Sheriff's Office in Northern California locating Philip Haney's body yesterday. The coroner's office says he died of a single self-inflicted gunshot wound. Authorities say the investigation is active and ongoing.
Everything we saw on scene is consistent with somebody putting a gun to themselves and pulling the trigger. Now, we're not making a statement that this was in fact suicide.
Previous reports did indicate Haney's death was a suicide, but deputies haven't made that determination as of yet. His body was found in a car in this park and ride that's along Highway 16. It's less than 3 miles from where he lived in an RV park.
Every death that occurs in the county, when it comes to something like this, we treat and look at it as a homicide until we prove otherwise.
There's been a lot of speculation that my office came to an immediate conclusion that this was in fact a suicide. If you will go back and review that initial press release, it states clearly that it appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. That is what we do on any of these types of cases. The initial deputies that arrive on scene make an assessment based upon the totality of information and evidence that they see at the scene prior to calling out the investigators to do the follow-up. That was done in this case as well. That is the start of an investigation. That is not the end of an investigation. We continue to move forward with that, along with some assistance from our fellow agencies in this region, not the least of which is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is going to be assisting us with the processing of certain evidentiary documents and things like that, the RV, the vehicle that he was in, a number of different things, a laptop, cell phone, some documentation, handwriting, things like that need to be analyzed. They are assisting our investigation. I want to make this clear. This is an Amador County Sheriff's investigation. We are being assisted by the FBI on the forensic side of things.
The news of Philip Haney's death came as a shock to his friends and family. In speaking to investigators and to the media, they were adamant that Philip Haney would never take his own life.
He didn't kill himself.
That he was doing great and he was getting, he was surrounded by family and friends and everybody who loved him. So hearing about his death was really quite shocking to me.
No, I do not believe that he was suicidal. So you have a man that was planning to get married, a man who was very devout in his Christian faith, a man who had, a lot of incredible projects in the works, including this new book that he planned to bring forward. And suddenly, Friday morning, he's dead of a gunshot wound.
I can't be convinced that Phil Haney committed suicide. I knew him too well. I've talked to at least a dozen of his close friends since that period of time that also said the same thing. The instant the news hit them, they knew that Phil had already prepared us to know that he would never commit suicide.
It's hard for me to believe that it was a suicide. We had talked about it. We had a mutual pact. If it said either one of us end up having committed suicide, then the other is going to make sure that truth wins out. He was working on a second book where he did name names.
Other facts that raise suspicion, according to Gomert, a thumb drive containing sensitive government information about Islamic extremists and national security that Haney always wore around his neck was missing at the scene of his death more than a month ago.
And he had a thumb drive with a lot of data on it, I don't know how many gig it was, hanging on a lanyard around his neck. And I understood that that information was also deposited in a remote location or two or more. So that was his insurance policy that he wouldn't be killed.
On July 22, 2020, the Amador County Sheriff's Office made a press release with an update on the case.
The Amador County Sheriff's Department said that the FBI has performed a forensics examination of all the items that they collected, and that the Amador County Sheriff's Office expected to, quote, receive these reports within the next few weeks, end of quote. That was July. Within the next few weeks, well, that would have taken us into August. It's February 2021. As someone who was going to marry Philip last year on April 4th, I'm getting absolutely zero information. Please share this out, because my goal today is to put pressure on the FBI and the Amador County Sheriff's Department, these law enforcement agencies, need to be held accountable. Philip had said that he hoped the book would be completed, the manuscript would be completed, and he had hoped it would be released, be published and released last spring, early summer. Well, when he was found killed, who knows where it is? The Amador County Sheriff's Office said they gave all of this, everything, to the FBI. Is the FBI afraid of the information that was going to come out in his book? Were they afraid that information was going to come out on his thumb drive? Are people within the Obama-Biden team that worked for the Obama-Biden administration afraid? Are people now working in the Biden administration concerned? Why is the FBI just going to box up this information and analysis and these reports and just put it on a shelf? Is it going to just be another cover-up? When are we going to get the truth? It's a year later.
On March 8, 2022, the Amador County Sheriff's Office concluded that Philip Haney's death was a suicide and closed the case. That same day, both the Sheriff's Office and the FBI released hundreds of pages of case documents to the public. Sheriff Gary Redmond, who was appointed upon Martin Ryan's retirement in 2021, appeared on a local radio show the next day to discuss how they came to this conclusion.
Everything indicated suicide due to the fact the gun shell casing was there. The body was indicative with the position of how we believed he committed suicide, in a seated position. And then we found a suicide note. And then when we responded to his RV, he actually had everything laid out and directions on how he wanted things taken care of for his death. Mm-hmm. We talked to a neighbor who said he was depressed and he had given him plants, his house plants the day before. So you take all this information and you start processing it, and it leads in one direction. We reviewed as much as we could. It was a tremendous amount, and never once did we come across a theory of Hillary Clinton out killing anybody.
Despite the assurances of Sheriff Redmond, there are some glaring discrepancies between the sheriff's media statement and the evidence documented in the actual case files. The sheriff cites the suicide note as a key piece of evidence, but in fact, only the signature was definitively verified by handwriting analysts at the FBI. The actual handwriting of the note was not definitively verified to be Haney's handwriting. The analyst noted that a more definitive conclusion could be reached if more handwriting samples were analyzed. On what looks to be an earlier draft of the handwriting analysis, the written conclusion states that neither the signature nor the handwriting could be definitively verified. This text is crossed out and the final draft is written below. The sheriff also cites the interview of Haney's neighbor, D. Roy Stiles Jr., who allegedly told them Haney appeared depressed and gave him potted plants. However, the sheriff's office report of that interview paints a different picture. In the report prepared by Deputy Casey Betancourt, Stiles says, quote, "The idea of having surgery was weighing on Philip Haney's mind." Betancourt's report further states that Stiles was, quote, "adamant that he did not think Haney would kill himself." This version of events was confirmed by Sergeant Patrick Wirt in his report summarizing the same interview. The phrase "appeared depressed" is nowhere to be found in the report. The report also reveals another plausible explanation for why Haney would be giving away potted plants: the fact that he was planning to sell his RV and move in with his sister in the near future. Another fact that influenced the sheriff's conclusion was the financial paperwork neatly laid out in Haney's RV. Louis Gohmert's statement back in 2020, long before this evidence was made public, offers another plausible explanation for this fact.
He had made clear to his sister that something he was going to do and something he was doing. He said, "You need to come over because I've got everything laid out. If something happened during the heart surgery next week, got everything laid out." And that's how he was. Everything was so organized.
We are now left with some nagging questions about the investigation into Philip Haney's death. Why was the language of a witness statement changed, and who changed it? If D. Roy Stiles Jr. really told the sheriff's deputy that Philip Haney appeared depressed, why wasn't that written in the report? Even if we accept it at face value, why would they give this statement more weight than the statements of Stiles and all of Haney's family that he was optimistic about the future and would never take his own life?
It's clear that it wasn't thoroughly investigated. I know for a fact that the people closest to him were not interviewed at all by the county or by the FBI, which seems to me curious. If you're trying to establish what was the state of mind of this person before he died, you would want to talk to the people who were with him in the days before that. And I know who those people were, and they were easily, they actually even came into the office there. They were easily accessible.
Why didn't the FBI ask for more handwriting samples to reach a definitive conclusion on the contents of the suicide note? Haney's family and close friends would almost certainly have offered more samples to help the investigation. Why did the Amador County Sheriff's Office view some of the circumstantial evidence with a bias towards suicide when there were other equally plausible explanations? Why was the FBI so interested in recovering, quote, contraband documents on Haney's thumb drives and laptop? Will the unpublished manuscript of Haney's book ever see the light of day?
I don't have a copy of that second book. I don't know of anybody who does. I've asked around a lot, but I'm going to continue asking and see if we can get it. And that would be, I think, a tribute to his legacy if we could publish that. But what was clear was that the sheriff was not really fully in tune with what was going on. I heard him give an interview on a local radio station where he said something that was just flat out false about Philip.
Married but divorced or separated?
No, he definitely was divorced.
And just the fact that you didn't talk to the people closest to him. This is a public servant, and he should answer to somebody like you a simple question of why the people closest to him, the people, including the people who were with him the last week of his life, were not ever interviewed.
What do you think? Was this indeed a case of tragic suicide, or was it something else? Follow the links in the description to read the case files and decide for yourself. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below.
If I'm dead and there's a suicide letter, it will be a fake.